Hi, everyone. Sam Eckmann of Gold Derby, joined by a panel of the industry's top sound designers today. Here with me is James Harrison from Blitz, Cyril Holtz from Emilia Pérez, and Nancy Nugent Title from Wicked. At the Oscars, we recently, not too long ago, had sound editing and sound mixing, which were combined into one. One of the major reasons that people gave was some voters felt like, oh, well, I don't know if I know enough about the distinction between those disciplines to make the most informed decision. So I feel like let's help those folks out. What would you say are the most kind of common misconceptions about your work that you feel like you get questions about and want to clear up?
Well, actually, I'll just kick off just from an audience point of view. A misconception. My grandparents, my late grandparents, right until they passed away, they thought that I basically played the organ in the cinema when it was coming out of the floor. It's just, and I gave up trying to explain to them what I actually did. But I think for most people, and I'm sure the others are like this, it's they just think that all the sound is just recorded on set and then that's pretty much it. And then you might have to do a little bit of tidy up and then you put the music on and then that's it. And then when you sort of go through and explain or even play some material to them about what you're doing, and they're just blown away by what we contribute and the level of detail that we have to put in to make the film come to life.
I will say my favorite reaction when if someone asks what I do and I say I do sound for movies, they say, "Oh, does that mean you get to see the movie before it comes out?" Then I explain, yeah, every day, every single day, and everything that you hear, I feel like if we've done our job properly, it's maybe not noticeable, maybe it's transparent, maybe you're just immersed in the experience of the film, but every moment of every frame is a deliberate choice and months and hours and sometimes years of work and hundreds of tracks of sounds have gone into making that sound a certain way.
I may have just one thing to say. Maybe it's a good thing that people aren't really conscious about sound or our different jobs. Because, as James was saying, sound must bring things to life and uh, beyond just creative and immersive experience. Sound is a powerful way to convey sensations and emotions, often without the audience even realizing it. So it's incredibly meaningful for us to reach people's heart through this work in general.
Well, it's interesting you put it that way, Cyril, because I've had past sound designers here tell me that sound is an invisible art form, right? And it's one that people often, the average moviegoer may not be consciously clued into. Does that resonate with you all? Do you want folks to be discussing the sound design after, or is a sign of a good sound design that they're not discussing it?
I think it really depends on the context of the film. I mean, by its very nature, sometimes you're going to be aware of sound that's gone on, like the lightsaber in Star Wars and stuff. You know that that's something that's unique for that and created, and it sounds awesome. So I think it depends on the context. If you've got certain movies that are big and loud and bombastic, you are going to be made aware of those. But in other films, it's the subtlety that, yes, if it fits the film really well and it's, as Cyril was saying, it's creating an emotional context, then yes, hopefully the audience won't be aware of it. It's just affecting them on a sort of deeper level. Just like sort of music does sometimes. They may not even be aware that there's a score there at times, and it's just doing its thing underneath it all. And it's just those moments are really good when they do happen like that.
Yeah, I have to agree. I think our job is to support the story. And if the audience is fully immersed in the story, then hopefully we've had some part in making that happen. And I almost think if the audience is focusing on individual elements like the sound or the lighting or that maybe we're not doing our job.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. Sometimes I think to myself that when people are amazed by the sound of a film, it means that it's spectacular, in a way. Sometimes we say the sound is bigger than life, but actually I don't really like this idea, because life is a constant surprise, and in many ways I believe life itself is always bigger than anything. So it's a good sign for me when people are not noticing at all the sound. It means they are this is the film that touched them, and it's the most important for me.
Is there, so as experts in the field, do you find yourself kind of paying more attention to it? What makes you in the theater say, you know, perk up and go, oh wow, that's really great, I have to do something like that?
We're probably all guilty of that. You know, something sounds really cool, it might be more noticeable to us than to the average viewer. But I hold myself to that same standard. If I'm not noticing it, if I'm fully immersed in the story, then I think that's a success on every level.
I think I'm sure you two are exactly the same. I think one of the hard things working in this industry, and every day we go in and we're just listening to details. We're listening. And when you come out of that environment and you go to, say, a restaurant or a bar or something like that, and you're just trying to talk to someone in front of you, most people can just do that. They can filter out all these sounds and they'll just go away. But I'm just always bamboozled by all these details. I'm listening to all these conversations around me, and it's an absolute nightmare. I really hate that. So yes, when we go to films, it's just you are listening and judging. But a sign of a really good film is when I go and watch it and I get into the film more, and I'm just sitting there and enjoying it. And then I go, oh, actually, I haven't really listened to this. And if it's so, usually if that's happened, I'll go back and watch it again and actually really try and listen to it for a second time.
Right. Go back for a second pass with a critical ear.
Yeah.
I have a really hard time as someone who started on the dialogue side of sound editing, listening to, say, news radio, the sounds of people's mouths and their sinuses and their that's when I have a really hard time. I have to play it really low if it's particularly egregious.
We also
Maybe
have,
to keep on James' restaurant story. When I'm a restaurant, I'm in a restaurant, I always think to myself, how would I mix that? And life actually is always a bad mix, but
So true. I have been out at the mall, say, with my husband, and I'll hear a conversation walk past and I'll go, that just sounded like Bad Loop Group. If that was in a movie, we would have to take it out. It just sounds too fake. It's too on the nose.
Or if they're wearing a weird pair of shoes and you go, I'd never lay that up. That's just completely unbelievable.
We're really like control freaks, right?
Yeah. In a good way.
Yeah, in a good way. I hope in a good way.
Well, we have a lot of different, in this panel, there's two very different musicals represented, as well as a war film. I'm wondering if you are drawn to certain genres or styles of filmmaking. Are there some that just naturally grab your interest more than others?
This was my first time working on a musical ever, doing Wicked, which was terrifying to me at first, but I think I realized really, like, many years ago, I worked on my first horror film and was terrified. And I realized quickly that you know, every genre, your purpose there is to facilitate the story, no matter what the story is. And so in that way, they're all the same. You know, it's just a matter of how what that story is and what that filmmaker is trying to say. So I see it as exciting to get to work on a new genre. I learned so much on this movie that it makes me excited to, you know, try more different things in the future.
I think that's one of the amazing things about our jobs is every film, every project we do, you're collaborating with new people, new directors and editors and producers, and then your team might be slightly different as well. So it's all, and then you've got a whole different film, a whole new new thing to work on. So it's just that freshness. It's just every single time you're learning something new, you're thinking about new ideas. It just keeps it so fresh. It's just great. I love the industry for that.
Yeah, I agree. Every film is a story of a first time, and I mixed another musical, but it seems to me like Emilia Pérez was the first one, so it has a meaning.
It's interesting because you were talking about the collaborators before, but the directors I feel like have such an impact on the film as a whole, and of course your work. I mean, we have two musicals here that could not be more different, I think, in style. And I know Blitz is an incredibly personal war film. Do you ever come into a movie and you have kind of a preconceived notion of what this might be? Oh, I've never done a musical before. This is what it's going to be. And then the director really changes and alters what flips your
I think
expectations.
I think that's one of the good things about when you read the scripts and you start trying to visualize what it's going to be like in your head, and you start to plan and sort of things like this, and you can even have some early conversations. And then when you start to see it, it's like, oh wow, okay, this is not how I imagined it at all. And something that could have been just a little paragraph in a script turns into this 10-minute scene, and vice versa. Something that's really detailed is just almost cut out. So yeah, that's a really interesting point. And it's funny because Blitz as well was, Steve sort of started to call it his musical number, because there's so many musical bits in Blitz and live singing and things like that he was actually, so I haven't worked on a musical before, so I suppose this may be as close as I get to one in a weird way.
Yeah, it is a fun journey going from seeing the written script to actually starting to see scenes come together on screen, especially when it is a musical and there might not be a description of a scene, it's just the lyrics of the song. And so seeing how that develops is really fun. As far as directors, John Chu he's all about the emotion of every scene and every moment of every scene. So we would start by watching the scene and him telling us, this is the emotion. This is the story. This is what we're feeling. This is what I want the audience to be conveying to the audience. This is what the group around the main characters are feeling. And then it's up to us to reverse engineer from there and bring that to the speakers.
For me, and I think Jacques Audiard would agree, it's really essential to come up with ideas about how certain sound choices will enhance the film. We do like spotting sessions, plan everything carefully from the script, but sometimes the film behaves like a wild animal, and rejects all those carefully crafted principles. It develops a kind of immunity of all our grammar by the time we're editing. So I think that's when we need to be really flexible, rethinking our ideas, and adapting the work to what actually works. I think it's the most rewarding part of the process. And if along the way the sound managed to give the audience a few chills or even goosebumps, I don't know, then my happiness is really complete.
Is there a genre or even a director that you haven't worked with that you are dying to try something new?
That's a good question. I mean, I grew up with all Spielberg movies, so I think Steven is probably someone that I would just love to just work with, but I don't think I'd actually get any work done. I'd just be sat there staring at him, just going, "Oh my God, who's Steven Spielberg?" Because I just grew up with all those films and George Lucas films when I was and they had such an influence on me. So possibly him. He's the first, when he asked the question, that's the first name that popped into mind. But I've been very lucky. I've worked with some great directors over the years. that when I started in this industry, I never thought I'd be working on these types of films. I thought maybe just if I was lucky, I might do some sort of low budget TV things and low budget films. But I've been really lucky. I've been very blessed.
I've been so lucky as well, so fortunate to just have years in a row of working with lovely people. I will say a genre that I feel like is disappearing from theaters that I really miss is comedy. I love working on comedy. I feel like sound can play such an important part in the comedic experience, and I just love it. And so I wish that I hope studios will continue to support bringing comedies into theaters. And it's just fun.
They are so good. I did Nice Guys a few years ago, and that was
Oh,
just
excellent.
I loved working on that one. It's such a good tonic but it's hard to concentrate on work when you're just laughing a lot as well. So it's a double-edged sword.
Exactly. When you're working on a comedy and you're still laughing at the end of the process, then you know it's funny.
There's a couple of quotes from it that I still, do you know, when you're working on a film and you're always just repeating certain lines
Yes,
in the film.
yes.
There's a couple of lines from that film that I'm still to this day I always say. So yeah, it's
Oh yeah,
stuck with
they
me.
stick with you. They stick
Yeah,
with you. My
really do.
husband and I, who is a sound designer, have worked on a couple of comedies together, and it gets unbearable in the house with either the accents or the one-liners, and the kids are rolling their eyes, but it's a
And
lot of
sometimes
fun.
if it's taken out of context, it might sound a bit weird as well sometimes.
By the way, the sound of Nice Guys is so great. I saw it in Cannes actually, and
Oh, really?
it's really great. I don't think there are so many directors who I dreamt to work with, but maybe I'm like James. I feel so lucky to work with people I was dreaming to work with. Uh, I think about so many of them, so I'm blessed too, I think.
Well, I think Hollywood, to me, feels like it's continually making films that really rely on a robust soundscape and a large sound team. What would you say, to people maybe coming up in the industry, what is like the best skill they could have or practice when they're getting into this industry?
I think absolutely always being open to learning. When I started as an intern, the editor that I sat with, we were on Fairlight at the time, so that tells you something, said, this machinery, like anybody can learn to operate it, but you need to understand the concepts and you need to develop your sense of taste. And that ended up being true. No one uses Fairlight anymore. The technology is always changing, and it is important to be up on the latest technology so you can, do your job to your best capabilities, but always be open. Everyone around you has something you can learn from, good or bad.
Yeah, I think it's really important because it can be a tough industry, and you can get lots of knockbacks, and it's important that it's something that you really want to do and it's something that you enjoy. So even when you're doing stuff that's then maybe just rejected, you can still go, well, I enjoyed doing that. I enjoyed creating that, and I thought it was working. And you can move on. If it's something that you're not really getting a lot out of, then it can be quite a tough one to do. And I think, yeah, touching on the Fairlight thing, I sort of started on my first thing was on like 16 mil and then went on to audio files and I
Okay,
think
you win.
a lot older. But I think one of the things we probably learned a lot with is having those restrictions in our track lays and not being able to have too many tracks. And
Mm.
it's sound editing is also really about choices. And I see a lot of the sort of junior people coming up and they have all this scope for all these things that they can do with all these plugins and sometimes it's just far too much. And so you have to, as an editor, we're employed to make decisions, rightly or wrongly, to really lead the viewer through these moments. And so that's just something for them to, if they're coming up through the ranks, just to really be aware of and, keep it as simple as possible, and it becomes a lot more effective sometimes.
I have almost a contrary example. Um, uh, a few years ago, I was working with Jacques on the French version of the Sisters Brothers, and Jacques felt that despite my efforts, the dubbed voices still sounded a bit static, and it sparked the idea for a tool that could simulate movement even from a fixed studio recording. The idea was to capture the shifts both of the actor and the boom mic to recreate the feel of a live set. And a few years later, I co-founded a company dedicated to creating software for sound post-production. And this tool called Boomit was our first release, actually. And we used it extensively in Emilia Pérez on the song. So the tools are really important. It may be seem trivial, but it's not. And I think what you have to learn when you start in those jobs is humility. I'm sure about that, and curiosity, and you learn very fast that you can always learn from something else, especially a director, even if he asks you something totally crazy. And I think that's what I learned the most during my years in this job.
Well, the many years have paid off. Thank you so much for all three of you, Nancy, Cyril, James, for joining me today, and wonderful work on all three of your films.
Thank you for
so
having
much.
us. Thank you.
Thank you very much.